Welcome to our Zoom folks. Please let us know if you can't hear us. We can always tell everyone to speak up, use their outside voices. I think we just have a few, but please add your questions or comments as well. We'll try to get to them.
Sure. Well, okay. So before I started serving congregations in Hartland, I actually served at Our Savior's in Austin for 20 years. I was the director of Children, Youth, and Family Ministry, and the year that I left was the year that I went into internship. Ironically, was 2020.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. And so, as a youth worker, children's ministry person, I mean, the shock of having to immediately stop what you're doing, knowing that we cannot gather for small people, we get no goodbye. I mean, all of those things. That was just a very, very difficult season. And I mean, heartbreaking, I think, probably on many levels, and I'm sure everybody experienced that differently. But probably there's some resonating feelings, I think, that go along with that. So whatever programs were in place, whatever things were in place, couldn't be, nothing. And if you have students that are back after this, good for you. Because overwhelmingly, I think during the pandemic, one of the things that I heard a lot of is that I think I'm a more regular church attender now than I've ever been, because I could sit in my pajamas and drink my coffee, and this is more accessible. I can pause it when my kids are, throwing a fit. Can't pause that in real time in church. It doesn't happen. I tried that this morning. It didn't. And so, that whole thing was something that I heard very, very deeply, because I don't think it's that families don't want to. I don't ever think it's that. I think it's how they're able to connect. And so we're here talking about youth and families. A pattern that I think was probably pretty pervasive, and I'm speaking in generalities, so please stop me. This is a brushstroke. This is not probably, your congregation may be different. But before the pandemic, programmatic ministry was kind of what people were striving for. However, relationship was the core that we were trying to go for, using programmatic ministry to try and kind of accomplish this. And relationship only happens when people are invested. And what was happening was that more and more students wanted to invest, but adults did not. Adults were spent. This is another place they could drop their children off, and they didn't have to engage, but they trusted us to be responsible about engaging, which we took seriously and did. But how that bridges over a pandemic is a different thing. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for the end of that, because that was my end. And I was the person in your congregation so I empathize with you deeply. In that same realm, coming into internship into a congregation where there were no children at all was a very harsh kind of like reality check for me. But in the realm of that, in that space of that, we learned things that you guys are learning by your partnership, that other churches have resources, and when you pull your resources together, the trees start to provide for each other. And that was starting to happen there little by little. But there's some things that we have to kind of, I think as churches have to get over. And in specific congregations, some of that ownership, this is ours and it's ours alone, because it's never ours. It's only ours to tend for a while and to lovingly give away, just like our children are. and children that engage in our youth ministry, families that engage in our youth ministry. Youth ministry is kind of like an ending and a beginning, and so how you make that segue into young adult was kind of the craft and the hump that's been mysterious anyway for us in the past. I will say in current contexts, gleaning from what I've used, I'm recreating an awful lot because I came from a congregation that was very large, or larger for a small town, it was larger. And like 350 in Sunday school and 33 in a confirmation class. I confirmed one class, and we made a really big deal about him, and he still comes back to confirmation. And he canoes and plays guitar, but does not want to be a pastor.
Can't blame him.
No, but everybody in that congregation is invested in him, and he knows it.
Yeah.
Everyone has invested in him as an individual and him in his life in Christ. And holy cow, I mean, he's an awesome kid too. So that, I mean,
It helps.
it helps, right? But you know, different climates, different circumstances. For me, in the small context, relationship is important. I mean, our relationships with students and how we use those relationships to connect them to. And you know, programs aside, that's what the most important thing. I think one of the things we talked about was maybe talking about something that I'm really proud of. In confirmation this fall, we started something called, I put it on a calendar. Connected to Serve, so it's C2S, because it, you know, whatever. It's easier for me to remember, C2S night. Connected to Serve. And so once every month for our confirmation students and our youth, because they keep coming back to confirmation, we are connected to some aspect of service within the life of the two congregations. A really big ministry in small rural congregations is quilting. Do not dismiss your quilters, because that night, a boy that hadn't talked to that point was the best quilt finisher I've ever met in my life. And he came back to quilt with them on days off of school when they don't have school on Wednesdays. Because he could do something that he was successful at, and they cared about him in doing that. And he was part of a ministry that is vital in a small congregation. And, you know, all the things about, you know, adolescent development and your hands are busy and, you know, that stuff that all happened just because they wanted to share their gift. And so now instead of doing that once a year, we have to do it twice a year because, you know, they love it. But the beautiful connection to the story, to the history, that just happened. And that was not my doing. All I did was say, hey, be here at 7. And then the Holy Spirit took the rest. And so how, I guess for me, it's like, how can we create like holy space for people to encounter each other in ways like that? And it doesn't have to be fantastic and fabulous, but it does have to be authentic to who your congregations are and who your people are. So that's one thing that I'm proud of the congregation for. And that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them and how they shape their ministry.
So I'll share a little bit about myself and my context. So I shared that this is my first professional youth ministry role at Our Saviors. I do have more academic background in youth and family ministry from Augsburg University. Woohoo! Well, it was a college when I graduated, but now university. So I guess I'm
moving up.
yeah,
Almost
but
stopped.
so who knows?
Get a new sweatshirt now, right?
No, I'm taking the sweatshirt from Augsburg, actually. So I feel like I've learned a ton of things in the last 9 months. So my role specifically is Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries. And so I particularly work with youth anywhere from 6th grade up until young adult. And kind of some of the biggest things I've really been looking at, I mean, we always come back to relationship, and I've been thinking a lot about one of the things that when I came into our Saviors was I told myself I'm going to invest myself in the youth and community by showing up not to things that are Saviors, but things that happen in the community, to sporting events, to theater, to music events. I have recognized how quickly that has helped me build a closer relationship and a relationship of trust with youth and families amongst those youth that I've shown up. They're like, oh my gosh, my youth director is here. Like, this is so awesome. I would not expect you to kind of show up at this event. Or noticing that, we have a wonderful 8th grader who plays varsity basketball at Faribault. She's an all-star, and the mom has said, I've seen you at all like tons of our games, and we really appreciate your support. And so I think in those ways that you can show that you are showing up in their lives and care about things outside of church as well, is a way to help encourage them to like continue to be part of the ministry. That is church. And I think the hard part where tension that I wrestle with is I do believe it's important for us to bring folks into our church, but I think as much as it is to bring folks into our church, it's more about how are we living out in the community. And that's kind of where my framework is that as much as we can be visible to the rest of the folks in our community, that's a very strong value of mine. And so thinking about a joy, we have an awesome high school youth group. We average about 12 to 15 per Wednesday. So to get more background on our Saviors, we actually have 2 worship services, one Sunday morning, one on Wednesday evening. It's interesting because we've kind of almost created 2 congregations. We have kind of our older folks who come on Sundays with a handful of young families. It's either older folks or families with really, really young kids. And then on Wednesday nights, we have kind of the families that have anywhere from 3rd graders to high schoolers who kind of show up on Wednesday nights. And it sounds like some of you all might have a similar reality at your congregations. And so it creates a very interesting dynamic. And I think that's one of the questions we're wrestling with is how to kind of bridge these almost 2 different congregations we've created. But in that space, we've also created a high school space, particularly just for high schoolers. It's too late in the evening, it's 8 o'clock at night. And I get home at 10 o'clock every Wednesday and I say, can I go to bed now? But
I'm actually really sorry for you.
But one of the things that we're doing in the youth group is some of my hopes really is all about relationship building. It's how am I building trust with the young adults, the high schoolers in the group, but also how are they building trust amongst each other, and how are we wrestling with questions of faith. And so one of the things I've noticed is that our youth don't love to show up to worship for many different reasons. Either they don't like the style of worship, or the time doesn't really work for them, all sorts of different things. And so actually Pastor Drew and I last week decided to create a worship for them. And so we had a worship space specifically just for those about 15 youth. And it really was, a holy space in that we do not always have chances to sit down and have an intimate worship together. And so proud of the moments of, we for our sermon, instead of one of us kind of talking, we decided to go lectio reflection. So kind of a conversation dialogue around the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. And at the end, it was kind of funny. We were talking about, some of it can deal with apocalypse and some of it the end times, and all of them were like, oh my gosh, I'm talking about heaven. What happens in heaven? We all go to hell. What happens here? And like there was like 5 of them like talking at the same time. I said, whoa, okay.
Oh, he's opened up an anxiety door.
Yeah. But it was at the same time it was overwhelming for someone who's helping facilitate that. It was a holy moment of knowing that yes, our students are really wrestling with these questions about God and wrestling with what are we called to be? What are we called to do? And knowing that I believe part of my calling as a youth minister is to facilitate those spaces where they can ask those questions and have them held passion, and knowing that those questions are holy, and that we are called to continue to ask those things. So those are one of my continued current joyous moments. Yeah,
That's awesome.
that's all right. I think, let's see what is 3:03. How did that happen? Okay. I wonder.
No,
We're having a sidebar across the circle like you do.
Well, I'm wondering, if we actually would love to hear from you all, you know, either we could start with what is a joy or what is a sorrow that you're experiencing currently in youth ministry? As an aside, but I went to the ELCA network gathering in February, and we had one presenter had a conversation around sexuality, which was very interesting, but they actually opened it up. They had this whole thing presented, and they're like, you know what, let's just start. What are your questions that you have? And we spent the whole hour, people asking questions and her answering. So I'm hoping for the next half an hour, maybe we can kind of put the space where we can wrestle with these questions together. And knowing that Marcia and I are not necessarily going to have the answers, but knowing the collective wisdom in this group, we can have some good wrestling together. So now that I have that long preface again, I tend to do this randomly.
That's why they love it.
That's why you're in ministry.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I'd love to hear what's a joy or what's a sorrow you all are wrestling with in your ministry context around youth, around young adults and families. That anyone would like to share in this space.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is like, how do we meet, having 2 little kids of my own at home, how do we meet these families where they are? To let go of how everything used to be and how it looked back then. How do we meet these kids where they are and let go of some of those things? Like you said, kids aren't loving coming to worship on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday evening. So how do we meet them where they are and give them that space to still worship, and go from there, you know? But it's hard, like letting for the older generation to let go of what always has been and now meeting the youth and families where they are.
I'm gonna ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
When you talk about you know, what the church has been,
Yeah.
Or maybe you're talking pre-pandemic, or you're talking, you know, 20 years ago.
Sure.
What are some images that come to mind of what the church was and how it is now? Just give us-
So our congregation is a fairly older congregation. We have a lot of older members. And so when they think that group thinks of the kids should be in the pews on Sunday mornings, dressed to the nines, looking straight ahead. I mean,
Right, quiet,
yes, quiet.
not moving.
And I'm talking like, we've celebrated 100 years, a couple years ago. So they look back at when the pews were full of children and why aren't children coming to church? And, you know, just a couple years ago, there was the comment of, well, so-and-so's acolyting and they're not wearing a robe and they have holes in their jeans. You know, instead of like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that we have these 3 youth in church on Sunday morning. They are worried about the holes in their jeans. Yeah, but I mean, those are the things that's like, how do we also build those relationships and investment in our children? And I'm sure other congregations wrestle with this, but the fact is like, they're so stuck, people can be so stuck in their ways that they don't see that they need to change for the future of their congregation.
And that we don't actually have a clear understanding of what that change looks like, right?
Exactly.
Which is, I think,
Yep.
sometimes the hardest part around fear
Yep.
is that what looks successful, what has been defined as successful for youth ministry in the past has been, for
Yep.
Sunday school, we have our
Yep.
age appropriate age, first grade, second grade, third grade, everybody has like at least 5 or 15 or 33 kids, that's a lot in a class. That's Sunday school, and then you have your confirmation, and then you have your youth group, and like, it has a very specific, that's what successful is, and like,
Yep.
and reimagining success without an actual outcome, because we don't know we really don't. I mean, I think working through the fear and anxiety of, okay, if I don't have 15 kids here today, are we still doing youth ministry? Yes, even if everybody is over 60, how you talk about youth, how you talk about kids, and when they do show up, how you show up for them is still being youth ministry, is still being church for kids. But that's a whole, I mean, that's just a whole different framework that takes years and years and years and.
Well, like for our congregation, we took the leap a year ago to move all of our Sunday morning programming for our youth to Wednesday evenings. And that was a huge, like it was a big hill to overcome because the congregation that was here on Sunday is like, why are there no kids in church? Why is there no Sunday school?
And we're
You
still
know,
getting that question.
we're still
2
getting-
years later.
Yeah.
But how's it been going for the families who show up on Wednesday now? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Are they
well,
happy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was kind of like what we had to tell the congregation on a Sunday is that this is what works for our families. We've created a space on Wednesday evenings.
Which you are welcome to attend, I bet.
Yes, but we're dealing with the same thing that it sounds like you guys are. It's basically two separate congregations. But what we've found is that we've created events, like Jenny, our youth director, just did an event where she paired grandparents of the congregation to come into Fusion and help the little kids create their craft. So that it was intergenerational.
Yep.
So there's ways to do that, but it is hard. Or like have the Fusion kids sing on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
You know, once every quarter or whatever
Right,
it is.
yeah.
But it's hard.
I
You do
think
have
you're right with relation to that intergenerational thing. Let's face it, large congregations, small congregations, the older people are paying the freight. They're the ones who are putting the dollars in the
Yep,
collection
yep.
in your basket
Yep.
every Sunday, so you cannot dismiss those people.
No.
But you also have to do the intergenerational thing. I'm glad to see that you're doing that with regard to, I mean, at Grace, at one time, we had the term partners. Kids would be, you know, a adult would pray for a child and then talk with that kid about their concerns and what are their child's concerns and, you know, kind of the generation of the grandparents kind of thing. That's the important thing too. And we went on a youth trip, to Colorado last summer. You kind of, everyone who gave money to this, got their name distributed to members of the kids who were going. So you get a nice thank you. I learned this on the trip. Thank you for praying for me. You know, something simple like that. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to pray. I mean, you have to have some image of what you want to have a kid succeed at. But that's intergenerational thing. And that's what's going to have churches survive. It's intergenerational.
But I think showing, like we've said many times, that we are not good at this in our congregation, is showing those Sunday morning people what we're doing with the youth on Wednesday night. You know, that our church is not dead because there's no youth there on Sunday morning. If you
Your
come
church
here
is not dead, full stop, but.
right, but
Yeah,
like,
anyway,
you get what I'm saying.
yeah.
Yeah, like if you came here on a Wednesday night, it is busy, and showing them what it looks like is
It's
important.
busy, it's messy, it's
loud.
It's loud.
I think that,
I'm sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, I think that intergenerational thing is important because you talk about kids, you know, every church faces the confirmation thing. That's nothing new. But at the same time, kids associate with kids. If you're not going, I'm not going.
Yep.
But if you do the intergenerational thing, if you have a problem with transportation, I can drop by your house, you know, 10 minutes for church and pick you up. That's okay. Or you want to go out for lunch afterwards, or what are you doing? You know, those kinds of building relationships. That's what life is all about, relationship building, regardless of where you're coming from and what age.
100%.
Question. But I think you guys are saying that like you switch all on Wednesday nights and that's been successful. So like one of the things that we're struggling is like people aren't coming back because there's so much going on. So like the point that you made of how do you come to them, like how do you find out the time that works for the most amount of people?
So for our programming, we had to actually work with the school district because the school districts bus our kids. So they come right from school, the buses drop them off here. And then we have to pay, obviously have to pay for the busing, but they drop them off here and then we just segue right into like a meal. So it's from 3:30 to 5:15, and then the meal and then worship right after that. But we wrestle with the school districts a lot because Wednesdays are used to be a Wednesday evening that nothing happens.
That is far from the truth.
But we've had to go to the district and say, hey, we support you, you need to help support us in the ways of like scheduling cheer practice on a Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock. doesn't work, because now you're conflicting these children with what they should do. And if they don't show up at cheer practice, they're not gonna get to cheer, you know? I don't know if that answers your question, but I think,
And it's been a big struggle within Austin, and that's something that parents said, like, all the churches need to come together so they can go
Yeah.
to the school district, but how do you do that when you have churches that won't participate?
Well, that's-
That's right.
That leads into, there's so much sports activity on Sunday.
Yeah.
Frustrated about, the young kids, with sixth graders. Over the Sunday school, they go to practice or have tournaments or something. Well, that starts with the parents, as far as I'm concerned. You say, hey, we're not gonna do this. But the peer pressure, well, if you don't go, you're not gonna play, you don't start playing in fifth grade when you get the junior high, you're out because you didn't play in fifth grade. Well, starts with the parents, as far as I'm concerned. It has to stop. But somewhere along the line, we've lost. I'm 72. I've got 3 children. We took our kids to church pretty regular. And even my kids at 45 aren't as regular church going as they were. But I see kids younger than that you don't see at all. Like I said, a confirmation, you don't see them at all anymore. And we recognize our graduates every year. Well, it's hard to give that graduate a gift when you haven't seen them since confirmation, but you still do it. Hope that somewhere along the line, if they see that blanket or whatever we give them, oh, that was really great. Maybe I should go back someday. So it's a struggle all across, but this Sunday that just irritates me. But Jesus,
The one thing I will say is it's kind of an easy thing to blame parents, but we can't do that. That is not fair, because we live in a society that has resourced our children. And our society, if we want to live in the world, this is our society saying that outside of school, which is your obligation, we're gonna make your time a resource that we are going to consume. And we are a consumer society. So as we start to consume, our kids are sort of unwilling victims of a little bit of this big system that only works because of the way we live. So and this is a big change. You're talking about 2 years or longer that it's taken you to make this change to Wednesdays. And you're talking about changing the culture of an institution. And we know how institutions change slower than the mud that I stepped in my way to church today. But really, if we look for something to blame like that, I don't think that's fair. It's not faithful to our kids. It's not faithful to our youth. Instead, I think we have to be the models and be the change. Sorry, I'm quoting somebody's phrase here, but we have to be what we're expecting. And that's lay leaders, that's pastoral leaders, that's everybody. We need to embody the way of welcome that says it's okay for you to come and accolade with holy jeans. I don't care. You're here. We love you. Thank you.
And if that was once out of 3 months, good for you.
That's right.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the other piece around the model and brain shift for church, right? Is that what is a regular attender? So my church is, we worship regular 35 people on a Sunday, and we do a Sunday school. I use that air quotes very loosely. A Sunday school, just 2 Sundays a month, and the third Sunday we do a children's led worship service sometimes, and because it always depends on who shows up.
Yeah.
And we've had as many as, literally last week it was my 2 kids, because I told my husband he had to bring them even though it was storming, I didn't care. Because I hadn't been there for a couple of weeks, and eventually you have to show up. And then we have weeks that we'll have 25 people. And I'm like, what? So as a youth, and that's really difficult to plan for. That is incredibly difficult to plan for. And there's a lot of variables that you have to live in. And so I was trying to actually answer your question about and we've been doing this for years and years and years, long before pandemic, and we've had our own issues with the pandemic, and people, half of it is because the regulars who before pandemic, all their kids are older, so now all their kids are in sports, so they're not gonna be regulars, but that group of parents who would have been like now in those like younger, earlier school age kids, haven't, this isn't a habit, so now we have to work back on, you know, coming once a month or twice a month, which is fine, but is what we found is like, we just skip, so. And we just do it. If there's energy around it and somebody wants to plan it, go ahead, do it, have fun. We might get 3 people, we might get 40 people. We had a skate night. I don't even know how this happened. I didn't go, I got sad about it, but. Like Easter Sunday and a skate night. Like they went skating. I don't like what? You all put on like, and there's these old people with like walkers in skates and walkers, like skating, and I have these pictures, and it's like so, and you just don't know. And then we had a pool party, and we had like 4 families, but they ate a lot of pizza because we ordered a lot. Because we didn't know, because we ordered enough for 60, so they took pizza. But like, you know what I mean? Like, and there is just like that part of we want it to be. We want to fit. We want it to fit into a, and it just doesn't. And so you just. But I will say, like,
that build it and they'll come. Build it, offer it, they'll come.
I mean, maybe, and then it might not, and that's okay. It's also okay if they don't come, and I think that's the part that gets.
Because you learned, well, that didn't work, but this did work.
And we had one movie night that worked great. We had one movie night that flopped, but will we do another one? Yeah, probably, because, you know, I like them. Like, you get 3 people who enjoy it, and like, you know, you'll get a bar and open up a thing and push play. It's not hard.
We're doing a Wednesday night program as well, and, you know, the school kind of said we don't do anything for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders on Wednesday. That was the word they got from the superintendent. Well, of course, then it's basketball season. All of a sudden, we're missing. And so there's 4th, 5th, 6th girls and boys basketball, and we all practice twice a week. Well, there's not enough time, otherwise some practice early, some practice late. So we had Wednesday night with our 5th and 6th grade boys had basketball practice. So, you know, and like you just want to say, but you can't fight it.
Yeah.
You cannot fight it. And so what we did, one of the dads, there were 5 boys. So one of the dads had one of his son was in basketball. So he picked up all 5 of those kids and brought them to our evening program late. They got their snack and they were late. We made sure we still gave them a snack. And then they finished up with their, whatever they were doing at that time. And then when we had our program or whatever, we just let them come in and be with us.
Yeah.
Because whenever they come, it's good. And you can't, I mean, you have to learn to work within the confines that you're consumer. I mean, they, you know, I don't disagree with the parents, because if the parents didn't choose that Sunday morning sport, we wouldn't be dealing with it. But the parents have already chosen that, and they're not going to not do it. You know, the day those super athletes don't go to those Sunday morning things, and they're all competing for ice time and gym time and all these kinds of things.
Well,
And we
how
just have to
many
learn
adults
to
don't come when the
work with it.
Vikings are playing? I'm sorry, is that only in my
Yeah,
context?
no.
No, that's not.
I understand, so I had a poor kid wear a Packer shirt today, somebody had to talk about it. Like, did he pray that he put on the thing, the Packers won the Super Bowl this year? And dude, I still pray hard for that, just to mess with all my Vikings
I
fans.
can still coexist.
Jacob, I don't want to pick on you, and if you're not comfortable talking, but I feel like we have a diamond in the room, and you've spent a while listening to a bunch of adults that really want to engage with you. What would speak to you? What?
Part of it is having the ability to do it. If you have it built, people are about to come. The activities are great incentive, and it's about engaging with the kids more hands-on than traditional scripture. So if you were to take them out in groups like we do now, everyone can learn at different settings, which makes it easier for them to comprehend what they're doing.
And what sort of activities or what structure are we, when you say that, what are you envisioning being built?
Well, with our small group that we have for Wednesday, it's a hangout place. Every once in a while, we did a lock-in like a month ago. That was really fun. Go out for ice cream, just talk about how things are happening, what we can do to change it. Just being there for those kids is another big step.
Do you have any ideas about how to match congregation members with youth or ways that we could enlarge? Yeah, what's the best communication, or from your perspective, what would be meaningful or helpful or?
I think it's just a matter of younger kids finding the older people that have the same interests as them to give them something to bond together over.
One of our very, just ordinary things.
One of our very first things was we went to Eaton's ice cream, I love ice cream. The girls sat on the picnic table, Jason's Jacob and I sat and fished and talked about fishing. And the girls were repulsed by the fish. You know, so he
Which
had-
made it all the more cool
Yeah.
for the guys.
Yeah. So, and from my take for the small group here, it has been the relationship building. The kids all know that they can tell me whatever they need to get off their chest, whatever they want prayed for, I'll pray for it. If they just want to complain about what's going on at school or the stress of teenage life, which was terrible when I was a teenager, it's even worse now. And just that they know that that is total safe, that there's totally an adult there that's there to listen to. I think that's what I provided.
If not, we're standing in now.
And so.
Thank you very much for being willing to share, Jacob.
And anytime
Can I-
you have any questions.
Can I interject one more thing? Showing up where they're at and never underestimate the power of that. And that dad who's like, well, I've got these kids up, awesome. I mean, there's. Oh,
You can finish, I'll go after you.
No, I'm just, what I'm saying is that I think, as we adapt in different contexts and sort of recover, in some contexts, after pandemic was starting all over again. And in reality, especially probably in youth culture, it is starting all over because it's a new age of kids. Kids still got older and our families still got older in that process. And so how do we start over again, right? And it's different.
Also an
Yeah.
opportunity.
Exactly, and that's a reality as well. You know, having the same conversation with anybody who's willing to just, hey, let's brainstorm about whatever. You know, conversations, can we share resources? Can I just about what's not going on? You know, spaces like that I think are helpful because that's really space that we've created outside of student ministry, where we can just reassess and try and figure out what we want to do. But if you have a chance, I would totally encourage you to go listen to the video recording of the intergenerational or the cross-generational ministry. Interestingly, we're both happening at the same time. And so, but I think there's some things in there, there's a lot of cross-generational ministry things, that concepts that can be applied to youth and family ministry, especially if we're thinking about the family as their teaching place too.
You know,
Because we can't leave out the fact that that's happening at the same time that we're trying to work miracles with a little bit of time, you know.
Yes, we have a comment from Doug Strandel. He says, as a former Bible camp counselor, I have growing concerns regarding our ELCA camps. They are dealing with such a catch-22 because they are having to increase the cost of camp for youth due to inflation, and at the same time struggling to find staff because they can't pay them a competitive wage for their summer counselors and support staff. The camp I worked for used to send outreach teams to congregations in the summer, but can't afford that expense anymore. Camps have always inspired our youth to find a path to Christ. We can't forget about this ministry and how it can inspire our youth and young families.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I'm a camp kid myself. My dad was a youth director in Wisconsin, a camp about the executive director of Faribault camp for 20 years. So I'm also feeling the same way, also feeling that that's where I found my calling as becoming a youth minister was through camp. And I think that's vital for us to continue to think about for congregations. How are we engaging our youth in our campus ministry, in our Bible camp ministries, but also I mean part of the experience for camp that was so formational for me is that it was held in what felt like sacred space, which is nature, which is this kind of beautiful space that we create, and it always felt like you kind of in a bubble. I felt like the campers come, you're here in a bubble of what is this amazing space for a week, and then you go back to reality. Is always kind of how I experienced it. And so I think camp could be a wonderful model for us to think about, well, how do we continue to have that bubble, not only in camp, but how our church is many extensions of those places, many extensions of what Bible camps are. Yeah, that was a great comment, and not sure if I have an answer, but one that I've been wrestling with next month. So happy to continue that conversation.
Maybe congregations could offer some sort of a supplemental scholarship for students that would be willing to spend a summer doing Bible camp, and because I know they're having, they have great expenses coming up with college and whatever, and I think a lot of them are saving for that. But it's terrible that the opportunity for camp connections is maybe being wasted or getting out of vogue, because I too, but the spiritual experience away from mom and dad it's amazing, it's not just mom and dad that are all about this. You sometimes don't get relationships deeper than that. But when you are talking to a camp counselor or somebody that sacrificed to be with you and to spend that important time with you, I think it speaks volumes.
I think one thing that's really important, like that's been important for me in my faith journey as I've been raised, is to see other people that I look up to, that are Christian people, that I can say like those, like I have a family that I'm like, that's what I want to be like when I'm 60 years old, because of the way that they've raised their children, and now their children are raising their grandchildren. Like having those examples to look up to is important for all of our youth to see that, and for us to place those people in their lives that they can follow them and feel supported by them.
Or the supplemental family that for those that don't have the ideal.
Kind of going back to the camp thing, I was just thinking about how we sometimes might undervalue ministries that happen outside of the four walls of our own churches, right? And camp is a great example of that, but there are others too, right? Where is ministry happening not in church? Where are our youth?
And it's not always called ministry.
And it's not always called ministry. Exactly right.
It's usually something
And where are our youth kind of starting to think about their lives theologically, right? And engaging that part of their spirit and their life. So, and how can we train them to do that?
Prime example is here in town. We have at the high school, there's a very large Fellowship of Christian Athletes component that was recently started within the high school. And, they'll post something on Facebook and I'll go, well, and I blow up that picture and look at it. Well, that's the first kid. How come they aren't coming to things here? And we get that pull of why aren't they doing this too? They got to choose one, and they're going to choose the one that supports their sport along with their faith. So they're doing that, but yet we feel they're neglected. They're missing out because they're not with us. They are getting, so there is that component too.
I think remembering that Christ is in the midst of all of that.
Yeah.
And like, it's actually not, it's our work, but it's Christ's work.
Yeah.
And Christ and the Spirit are showing up in a whole lot more places than just, at the movie night or the skate night
Just
or
because
the
they're not coming to us.
Sunday morning
doesn't mean
worship
they're
or
not
Sunday
being fed.
school. Right. And
And if we're equipping our children and our youth.
And our
equipping them
parents.
to go and do likewise.
Yeah.
Which means equipping them to be Christ outside of the walls of our church. And
I think
that's
the
a hard thing,
parents do it.
it's a hard thing when we try to hang on to that. It's a
As a
hard thing
parent,
for us to really.
you kind of wonder like, you know, but raising children, it's like, okay, how do I teach my kids how to pray? How do I teach
Right.
them how to, you know, pray before every meal or anything? How do we talk about different scripture with them? How do I get them to memorize scripture? So giving the
Oh my God, are you
parent,
making your kids memorize scripture? I'm like impressed with you if you are. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was like, holy cow, how did you have to tell me how to do that?
I would love to do that, but
I would,
like, how would you?
I don't want my kids memorizing, giving scripture back and no thank you. I know what my kids do with power, no.
But like, how do you equip your parents to then
Right,
be able to,
actually.
because you know, we think about it, you send your kids to school, they get taught everything they know at school. Well, with Sunday with church and worship, we have one time with them.
Maybe an hour.
Maybe an hour. So it's not just they're learning everything in that hour. We have to teach the parents how to go and minister to their kids throughout the week and not just that one
Yep.
day.
Equip them as well to actually have conversations, theological conversations. Which.
And teach them scripture.
Yeah, maybe, you know what, we're gonna start, I did tell my parents, my confirmation parents, oh, I feel like they need to like, they need to memorize the small catechism. I said, are you gonna memorize it? Well, no, then I'm not making your kids memorize it. If you come up and you want me to ask you, I will do it with your kids, but until then, no.
As much as I love to listen to you, Hannah, and I do, no, it is 4:01. And I'm trying to be respectful of your time as well. So thank you to the people online. Thank you to you guys. If you ever want to have more dialogue or want to have